I'm in the mood for some low-hanging fruit. I know, let's see what the young turds are up to.
If you watch mainstream media, you'd be under the impression that the economy is doing incredibly well. Americans are super prosperous. They have a ton of money. Look at the stock market. The numbers speak for themselves. The stock prices are up.
I can still see that you guys are pretending that you're countercultural, as if your view counts aren't being artificially inflated. Cenk Uygur doesn't regularly meet up and get shout-outs from Susan Wojcicki personally, are one of the few political channels which are still monetized after the adpocalypse, and you don't have basically the exact same views and narrative as any of the panelists on any other mainstream media outlet. Even Kyle Kulinski is demonetized, and that guy is basically just a skinny white version of Cenk. But okay, so far we're starting off on a relatively decent premise. The stock market is in a bubble, and the mainstream media's narrative about a booming economy is not right. I mean, Austrian economists and anyone else who actually watched how the government and Federal Reserve handled the 2008 recession have been saying this since then, because literally what the Federal Reserve's response was to the subprime mortgage crisis was to just print money. But it's 10 years later, and the young Turks just now seem to have finally realized that the stock market's going to collapse. I mean, I guess better late than never, but let's see how they manage to fuck this up, because you know that they're going to.
But the reality is, people are dealing with more debt today than they did at the height of the economic crash in 2008, and wages remain stagnant.
Indeed, this is what happens to your economy on fractional reserve banking, when there's a very weak, if not non-existent savings rate, and the central banks try and fix every problem they've caused through credit expansion by printing more money.
So the Fed has been looking into these numbers because they are considering increasing interest rates. And interest rates have been low since the recession, and when they raise interest rates, it's done in an effort to respond to an overheated market, okay? So inflation, for instance. They want to make sure that inflation doesn't get out of hand. But if they do increase the interest rate, a lot of Americans who have a lot of debt will suffer.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. What the actual fuck? No. I must be hearing things. Anna Kasparian of the Young Turks did not just admit that the Federal Reserve is responsible for wage stagnation and the boom-bust cycle.
So a Fed survey released this week showed 4 in 10 adults couldn't cover an unexpected expense of $400 and would have to sell something or borrow to cover it. That's down from half of adults back in 2013. But if a person needs a loan, the rate will be higher today than it would be in 2013. So the Fed is considering increasing the interest rate even further. So Americans now have more credit card debt than at the height of the financial crisis, at more than $1 trillion. That is insane. Okay, so there's that. And remember, wages haven't gone up significantly. They have remained stagnant for the most part. Overall, consumer debt, excluding mortgages, is on track to reach $4 billion this year. Okay. So consumers are also skipping more auto loan payments, particularly those borrowers with less than pristine credit, known as subprime, than during the financial crisis. So subprime loans in the auto industry are huge. There's a bubble there that is expected to burst. So keep an eye on that. Also, auto loan balances rose by $8 billion in the first quarter of 2018. Late payment rates also rose, with 4.3% of auto loan balances 90 or more days delinquent on March 31st of this year. So at the end of the first quarter.
Okay, well now my mind is actually pretty fucking blown. Not at what they're saying, because what they're saying is relatively uncontroversial, but that they are saying it. For the last decade, the Young Turks have been peddling this lie that the 2008 recession was caused by the deregulation of the market. Specifically, they argue that it was the repeal of Glass-Steagall which caused it. Would require a full video to respond to this, and Tom Woods already created a great rebuttal to it, so I'll provide a link to that in the description. But now they're actually trying to be honest, and admitting that the Federal Reserve is responsible for the 2008 recession, the market collapse, which is to come, overcome the boom-bust cycle, wage stagnation, increasing national debt, and the inflation of the US dollar. I can't believe I'm actually about to say this, but go on, Cenk. I'm actually interested to hear what you have to say.
So, this is part of why Trump won, and ironically why his presidency, I believe, could collapse. And so let me explain both of those. He won because Washington has no sense of the anger in the country, because to them the idea that you would be wiped out by a $400 expense is laughable, right?
That's right, Cenk. Politicians can simply force people at gunpoint to give them money whenever they want more money, unlike anyone who's not a government employee or a corporatist who actually has to earn their property. So they have no concept of marginal utility or incentive to do anything for anyone other than themselves.
And so they go on blithely thinking that somebody like Hillary Clinton, who's an enormously pro-establishment candidate, who ran a campaign basically saying, the status quo is pretty good. Let's stick with the status quo. That produced a rage in the country. And so that's why Trump won. Now, ironically, of course, as you know, that Trump didn't make it any better. So what did he do? He poured a ton of money into rich people. He gave rich people even more tax cuts.
Well, no, the problem isn't that corporatists are rich. The problem is that they're being subsidized by the government, which, on top of taking away any incentive they have to serve their customers, also makes the industry they're in incredibly anti-competitive and hard to enter for small startups. But sure, corporatists, I guess, tend to be rich, so I'll go ahead and give you that one. I'm just in a really good mood right now.
The average tax cut for the guys in the 1% from Trump was $61,000.
Tax cuts are not the same thing as subsidies and have completely different effects on the market. Come on, Cenk, pull it together. You're starting to slip, buddy.
$61,000 every year in their tax cuts on average.
That's crazy.
Okay, so the bubble keeps growing and growing and growing, and at some point it will pop. And when it does, there'll be even more devastation in the country.
No, stop it. You've just contradicted what Anna said not even a minute ago. You're undoing all the progress you've made.
Because all of you will have $400 emergency expenses, $4,000, because of all of the disasters that will unfold from that, and you won't have jobs, even the very low-paying jobs, etc. And when they go to bail out the bankers again, ooh, we're going to have a whole different animal in this country.
Right.
So, you know, buckle up, brace for impact.
And by the way, in regard to the stock market, Cenk and I have talked about this before, but just to reiterate, it's artificially inflated by cheap money that the Fed is printing out and giving to banks, for instance. They're supposed to loan that money out to small businesses, but they haven't done that. They just use that to buy their own stocks.
God damn it, no! The problem isn't that the banks aren't handing out loans with the money the Fed created through credit expansion, because they were. And you, Anna, admitted that they were only a moment ago. But that's precisely the problem. Because this is money that was just printed and given out to investment banks and not a reflection of the actual market's demand or the real consumer interest rate and savings rate, in the case of pretty much any recession, this means that loans are given out with no chance of ever being paid off, which sends false signals to investors that demand is increasing. In the 2008 crash, it was in the case of the real estate industry, when in reality there was no growth, so all the investors who put their money in real estate lost their money. The idea that bankers and CEOs just use all their money to buy stocks in their own companies doesn't even make any fucking sense. How do you earn money if you're wasting all of it on buying stocks in your own company? How do you actually earn money if all the growth in your company and the only person trading with it is you? And if you're the only person buying your own stocks, why would anyone invest in that company? As they could very clearly see that there's no actual growth occurring. Alright, so this was clearly a fluke, but what caused this brief moment of unintentional honesty to shine through? Well, the video is titled Why Trump's Economy is About to Crash, so my theory is that someone in the editorial room of the Young Turks must have come across an article written by the Mises Institute or some other Austrian economist critiquing the Federal Reserve and explaining why the economy is about to crash, but they must have presented it in their article in a way to make it seem as if it was an anti-Trump hit piece, and the Young Turks probably didn't realize that it was a deconstruction of the entire Keynesian social democrat economic model. They just saw "Orange Man bad" and decided to run with it. This is a consequence of what happens when your only conception of political debate is based on the party system in the left-right dichotomy. People like Anna and Cenk don't have any concept of markets or how they work, so if an Austrian economist comes along and writes an article which is critical of the Trump economy, groups like the Young Turks can be convinced to go along with it even though it contradicts literally every single narrative they've been pushing for going over a decade. But this is actually really important because it exposes a critical defect in statist indoctrination. A key part of making people feel as if they're dependent on the political system is through manufactured tribalism, that there is an other, and if you don't utilize the state to coerce others for your own interest, then they will do that to you. Therefore, you have to support a group constructed by the state and working towards the state's interests to fight against the other group, which is also working towards the same state interests, but because they advertise their ideas differently, you're given the impression that they're different. However, if you can convince statists that they're attacking the other by presenting a point which actually dismantles their own beliefs or the concept of statism, I believe it's possible from there to break people free of the cult of the omnipotent state and other mental constructs beaten into people's brains by the education system. This is the reason I think why disproportionately more conservative statists end up becoming individualist anarchists out of the people who do than liberal statists. Conservative statists already think that they are free marketers and that they're approaching politics from an individualist perspective. So individualist anarchism is simply the logical conclusion of their proposed ideological principles, which when pointed out to them causes them to question themselves. And self-doubt is the key to all paradigm shifts. So this is something important to take into account for the anarchist debate strategy. Anyway, that's all for today's video. If you liked it, please comment, rate, and subscribe. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you all next time.